"It is all for a bountiful harvest, child," Mother said, and Jacob nodded in silence. He could already see where this was going. Even if she didn't say anything else, the most important bit had been put out there. "And we do need a bountiful harvest. You understand, do you?" Again, Jacob nodded. Only this time, he could feel the fingernails of his left hand scratching over the skin of his right arm. It was a tick. Something he had started doing a few years ago, when he had been brought here. Father had another of his premonitions. In fact, it happened last night, after dinner. He was praying so hard together with me when the spirit rushed into him and sent him sprawling to the floor. Jacob nodded along. He knew these stories so well. They always went the same way. Mother would claim something had happened, and then start the theatrics. When he had been younger, he'd let himself get swept up in it. But not anymore. No. By now, it was a joke to him. But not a funny one. The gaunt woman was raising her hands toward the rafters of the old wooden house, as if she were summoning some kind of entity, as her voice began to tremble with religious fervor. It was such a momentous revelation. I had to stay next to him for over an hour, praying with him until the shaking of his body stopped and the Holy Spirit finally left him again. You should have seen him. Oh, I know I cannot describe it fittingly, but it is true. Jacob continued nodding. It was better not to interrupt Mother while she was acting out her stories. He knew. The experience pushed Father to the brink of collapse, he told me afterward. And I know he was telling the truth. His whole face looked sunken in. The skin around his eyes and lips had dried out, and I could smell the scent of the divine revelation still coming off him the rest of the night. We stayed up until morning, praying together to understand his will. Don't you think that's beautiful, Jacob? He gave her a slight smile and nod, still playing along. But now a part of him was stirring. Mother was building up to something, he realized. The bigger the task she had for him, the more fleshed out those stories used to get. And this one might just be the biggest one yet, judging by the glow in her eyes as she took a deep breath and readied herself to continue her tale. Disaster, terror, a dark presence, damnation. Mother's face had gone pale as she hissed those words, still holding her hands toward the rafters, and concentrated on him again. What the Holy Spirit had shown Father was nothing short of a tale of the end. Jacob, something bad is coming. No, something bad has already invaded the house. Among us is an unbeliever, an agent of chaos. Someone who wants to hurt us, me, you, and Father. And this evil presence will not stop at just hurting us. No, it won't even stop at killing us. This evil thing wants to drag our souls to hell with itself, where it may feast on us for all eternity. Jacob put on a concerned face, as Mother would want him to have, and nodded along. Never before in his life had he been more glad not to be able to talk out loud. He wouldn't have any idea what the woman would want him to say right now. But nodding and putting up an earnest face seemed to always do the trick. Not that his life had been easy, especially here. He had no recollection of his parents and hardly any of the time in the orphanage. Only that one day, this woman had shown up and taken him and a few other children to come here and live on her farmland. It hadn't bothered him much, at least not at first. The bed here was marginally better than in the orphanage, and the food was marginally better. Yeah, he had started to work pretty much the day he'd gotten here, but it wasn't like it would have been easier for him to stay someplace else. If he had remained in the orphanage, he probably would have ended up in one of those workhouses in the city by now. Cleaning abattoirs, or even worse, working close to the big machines with the dangerous belts. Here, the work was strenuous, yes, but he could slack off from time to time, depending on how many new children were present. And slowly but steadily, he had risen through the hierarchy and was now Mother's favorite child and confidant. Her silent helper, she had called him a few times, always ready to do the dirty work. He felt his fingernails scratching over his own skin again at the thought. Yeah, dirty work. She wasn't a friendly woman. Incapable of love, one of his younger siblings had called her. But at least she took care of them and fed them, which was a marked difference from many other people in this place. That was until something or someone started to bother her. Then it would be time for him to either teach them a lesson or solve the problem some other way. It had started when he had been 12, he remembered. The first time, Mother had told him about the impure thoughts she claimed one of the boys had, and had given Jacob a rod to bring that poor child back onto the righteous path. It had been a test, one he had passed with flying colors. Since then, he had been tasked with keeping the peace and dishing out punishments, sometimes even making sure some of the less useful children would leave the farm and run off. He'd hated those jobs since they had started, but doing them had secured his place at the table and given him a chance at life. Normally, he would have aged out of the system already, but Mother was going to keep him around for as long as he was useful. Which was the main reason he was still putting up the concerned face and nodding along to her inane story. At first, Father spoke in soft tones about a single hidden demon in our midst. One talking to a child. Jacob could see the tears welling in the woman's eyes, but the only thing he felt was disgust. There was a glimmer in there, hiding her true feelings. She always liked to play the role of a merciful and benevolent person. But he had seen her watch him beat some of the children with the rod and had immediately recognized her true nature. That wicked, lustful stare sometimes appeared in his nightmares. Do you understand? This blasphemous creature has invaded our home. Our family is at stake now, Jacob, and it isn't just a child we need to worry about. I fear it has already started to reach out to the other children, poisoning their souls. Tears were running down her cheeks as she stood there, now looking up at the rafters as if it made her story any more believable. Jacob stepped from one foot to the other. He wasn't sure what she wanted from him now. Maybe some kind of fearful expression? No, she didn't need him to be afraid. Jacob furrowed his brow and tried to look angry as he saw the woman slowly lowering her head, then staring directly at him. Her expression changed as well. From teary-eyed and begging to almost glowing with pride. She hid it quickly, but he had seen it. With that one look he knew so well. Mother was happy with him, thinking he was furious at some perceived invader. This disgusting thing is hiding in plain sight, Father's revelation has taught us. It is important that we stamp out the root of evil as quickly and thoroughly as possible. You understand? Every minute that passes with this thing still in our midst puts all our souls into grave danger. You need to be strong now, Jacob. Just like Father and me, you too are an instrument of the divine. Go back to your brothers and sisters and keep an eye on them. One of them will reveal themselves to you soon, and you will know that it is pure evil that they carry in their heart. Eradicate them from our midst. Save our family. Jacob nodded in response. He didn't like that word. Eradicate. Normally, Mother always talked about punishing them, exiling them, or stuff like that, which meant he should either beat up one of the children or send them off, but not today. She sounded like she wanted him to kill someone. Jacob could feel his fingernails digging into his skin, then a sharp pain as a single drop of blood came free and trickled down his arm. Mother was still looking at him, and her eyes felt like they were burrowing holes into his body and soul. Well, she had told him to find out who among the children currently on the farm was the problem, which meant he had time to think about what to do. He turned and walked out of the main building of the farm, putting his arms around his midsection as he left the warmth behind and stepped out into the cold. The house itself was spacious, but it was almost completely off limits to anyone besides Mother and Father. He and the other children had to contend with something that had once been a stable, but now housed all the young workers who were needed to run this place. There was, of course, another newer stable for the animals, one that could keep the warmth inside. But they were only allowed to enter if they were taking care of the livestock. Jacob had his own thoughts about that setup, but he would keep those to himself. There was nothing worse than getting on Mother's bad side. As one of the children was about to learn, he hated it. And he hated himself for being willing to do the old woman's bidding without complaint. But he had to. It was for his own survival. Getting kicked off the farm was dangerous at the best of times. But now, with winter coming, it would be a death sentence. Jacob wasn't sure if he would survive something like that, and he definitely had the best chances out of all of them. He walked across the wide-open lawn and looked over at the now barren fields. For a good harvest. That was Mother's favorite turn of phrase. It meant the survival of the farm and the continuous existence of this, for lack of a better word, family. Not that she really thought of any of them as such, no. She and her husband, who was probably the most frail man Jacob had ever seen, had stopped paying proper workers to run their farm, and had instead chosen to get orphans from the orphanages around. Of course, children were far less capable and knowledgeable than a normal laborer, but they didn't get anything besides meager food rations, and she could treat them whichever way she wanted. That was her real aim behind it all. Jacob knew. And now, with the bitter winter coming, thinning out the children was the easiest way to save on food. Jacob spat on the ground as another cold breeze hit him from the side. She wanted to get rid of at least one of them, maybe more. They would die if he threw them out. Either they would freeze out here, or if they managed to even reach the next city, starve on the streets. Jacob hated it. He would need to think about which of his 4 brothers and sisters had the best chance, and how he could help them. There still was a bit of bread left from 2 days ago, and he knew there was at least 1 or 2 blankets they maybe could do without, even if the winter got especially harsh. Jacob just hoped that Mother wouldn't insist on watching. That would mean all his plans might come to naught. Well, he just had to make sure they would disappear during the night. He could claim he had taken care of it before she could complain. Maybe she would get mad at him again, but it would definitely be preferable to the alternative. The only problem now was, who would he choose? Jacob opened the creaky door to the old, dilapidated stable and could immediately see 4 pairs of eyes staring up at him. The kids were huddled on the ground, in a group, trying to keep each other warm, and the sight almost broke him. Maybe it would be better for all of them to go somewhere else. Some place where it wasn't that cold. It was a childish, pointless wish, he knew. "Jacob!" The youngest of them all screamed in delight as she saw him, and the shout pulled him out of his thoughts. The girl was up on her feet and racing toward him before he could even close the door fully. And not for the first time, he noticed how thin she looked. Her name was Ruth, and she had been fixated on him from the day she had arrived at his farm, half a year ago. At maybe 8 years old, she was the youngest of them all, and if he was honest, she really didn't fit in here, at least for now. Hardly any day went by that she didn't need help or make mistakes. Yet not a single one of the others here had ever complained about her or ratted her out to Mother. And neither would Jacob. She clung to him, and he lifted her up, closing the door with his remaining free hand. The girl was far too light, a voice in his head warned, and he had to shake it off to not frown and diminish her joy. "Did Mother give you another job?" His heart sank as he heard her. She didn't know what he had to do, only that whenever he acted as that woman's instrument, he would bring in some more food she could share. So he nodded and noticed the other 3 pairs of eyes narrowing a bit. They all knew. The 2 boys, one 15 and one 13, had seen him beat another one not even 2 months back. The other girl, a 14-year-old, was averting her gaze completely. She had only heard tales and seemed more scared of him than the rest. "We took care of the cows and the goats already, so we have a few hours to play before we need to look again," Ruth whispered into his ear as he carried her through the stable and toward the rest of the group. It was pathetic. A voice inside his head piped up as he looked closely at his brothers and sisters. Their lives are here. They were at the mercy of not only the weather, but also of a delusional woman who seemed to grow more and more fond of watching kids get beaten and mistreated. If only he knew a way out, he would take them all with him. They could live real lives, do real work, and stop being afraid. But he didn't. At least not now. Once winter was over and the snow had come and gone, he might be able to visit the city again and try to find a place for them to stay. But that dream was still far away, and he knew he wouldn't be able to keep them all together until then. Especially with Father's latest revelation. He put Ruth down and draped one of the blankets over her shoulders. She would stay, as would the other girl. One of the 2 boys would have to be sacrificed. He glanced at them and the look in their eyes told him that they already knew what was up. The only reason they weren't asking him directly was that Ruth was sitting there and listening. Jacob felt their glares, though. He tapped the little girl on her shoulder and gestured for her to stay before he told the two boys to follow him. Telling them now would be better, he reasoned, and maybe one of them would even volunteer. Jacob prayed in his mind that it would be so. It would make this whole situation much easier. They followed him outside, leaving behind the thin blankets they had been draped in, and Jacob led them away from the old stable. Ruth would probably be listening in on them if they weren't careful, and Mother could be around here as well, trying to spy on his progress. It was impossible to predict what she would do. Jacob wanted to sigh. Sometimes it felt like he was surrounded by enemies at all times. They finally reached a bigger, better stable, and he leaned against the wall to show them that he wanted to start. Conversing with the people here was a chore as well. Neither he nor any of the other children could write or read, so they had to guess while he nodded or shook his head. Was it bad? They asked. He nodded. Did one of them have to leave the farm? Another nod. Who would it be? Jacob shrugged his shoulders. Was Mother mad at them? He shook his head. Did they make a mistake? Again, he shook his head. Could it be one of the girls? Jacob looked at him closely, then shook his head once more. He could see it in their expressions. Both of them were afraid. Would he have to beat them up? He shrugged and remembered Mother's words. His cold chill seemed to find its way under his skin. Badly? Jacob nodded and then shrugged his shoulders. The two faces looking at him went pale. He pointed at one of them, then the other. Choose, he wanted to say, and they seemed to understand. It was something they would have to talk about among themselves, though. Jacob pushed himself off the wall and walked away from the two who were now staring each other down. It wasn't fair, but it had to be done. Once they had handled it between the two of them, he could tell Mother that he had found the culprit. Then he had to hope she'd accept his decision and wouldn't want to watch. Jacob felt sick to his stomach as he made his way back across the lawn. There was no way out for him. All he could do was hope and pray. A shadow shot out from behind the corner of the house, grabbing him by the shoulder, and Jacob jumped back out of reflex, his hand moving down to his belt, where the rod was. He could see wide-open eyes staring up at him, and recognized a woman who was called Mother, standing out here in nothing but her normal indoor garments. "Did you catch it? Have you found it? The thing hiding amongst the children?" Her voice was higher than normal, almost erratic, and Jacob could see beads of sweat on her brow. That was something he hadn't seen before on her either. She looked panicked. He slowly shook his head, though. No, he hadn't found the one to blame yet. The two were still arguing with each other, in all likelihood. Mother reached out to him and grabbed him by the arm, squeezing his wrist. "You need to hurry. Please, it is spreading." She was imploring him. He had never seen her like this. So afraid. Would it really end with just one person exiled from the farm? Jacob had a bad feeling about this. Maybe it was time for him to put his foot down, to stop indulging her, even if the consequences would be dire. Could she drive them all off? Yes, probably. She'd just need to get new kids from the orphanages around. So Jacob nodded to show her he was taking it seriously. The old woman kept his wrist in her grasp for a moment longer, still looking at him with those burning eyes. He would need to end this quickly. Judging by the way she was looking right now, she was losing her grip already. If he didn't hurry up, she might demand something truly horrible of him. Jacob pulled back his arm and gave her a solemn smile. The woman seemed placated, at least for a moment. He turned and walked off, not wanting to look back at her or give her another chance to fall into some kind of sermon. It would be best for all of them if she went back inside and slept off whatever had gotten into her. He knew the two boys would take a walk around the perimeter of the farm to talk about their situation, and he hoped they would come up with a solution on their own. If he had to choose, he'd probably go with the older one. Not because he didn't like him, but because a boy of 15 would have a better chance of survival out there. Still, it bothered him. He would never see him again. The little family was breaking apart and there was nothing he could do about it. Jacob shook his head, looked up, and could see the dark building of the old shed, then put on a bright smile to not frighten Ruth before he opened the door again. The inside of the former stable was almost empty, and Jacob immediately felt this cold chill in his bones as he looked around. A single huddled figure was by the back wall. The girl, not Ruth. Where was she? Jacob walked briskly toward the figure, pointing at the spot where Ruth had been just a few minutes earlier. The girl looked up at him, then at his outstretched hands and waved him off, telling him that Ruth had gone out to do something, not long after he and the boys had left. A bad feeling overcame him. Had she snuck out to listen in on him and the boys? He hadn't noticed her at all, and he hadn't seen her outside, even on his way back. Something was up with her. He could feel it. Jacob turned and ran back, leaving the girl under the blankets behind. She could take care of herself. Ruth couldn't, he thought, and felt this strange, ominous feeling coming over him again. Something was wrong on this farm today. Mother was off, as were the children. The two boys hadn't returned either. Jacob burst out of the door, threw it shut, and looked at the ground. He could see slight footprints on the cold grass and mud. Some were his own, others from the boys, and only one pair fit Ruth's size. But they weren't leading toward the other stable, where he had gone, but off to the side, in the direction of the woods behind the farm. He cursed in his mind as he started running again. The forest out there was massive, dark, and dangerous. There could be wolves or bears or the like in there. Jacob felt this gnawing feeling in the back of his mind. Something was up. He grabbed hold of the rod. Not that it would do him any good against any of the animals in the area, but it calmed him down. Where would Ruth have gone? He still followed her footsteps across the barren fields. She had headed straight out, as if it had been planned beforehand. Or something had caught her interest. Jacob started running again. Who or what could have drawn her there? The other children had told her time and time again to stay away from the woods. Jacob almost stumbled as he saw a shadow in the dirt of the barren field and immediately stopped. As he looked up, he realized that he had already gotten close to the edge as well. But here, in the soft mud, he saw another set of tracks next to Ruth's. One that wasn't human, but from a cloven-hoofed animal. A goat? Had one of them escaped? There was no way, Jacob told himself as he looked across the field. The tracks weren't coming from the stable, but seemed to suddenly appear here. He pulled out the rod and scanned the area. Was it a wild goat? Or had this thing escaped from one of the other farms and wandered in here? It didn't matter, he told himself, and looked at the footprints again. Ruth had either followed it into the dark woods or had walked with it into them. He needed to find her. Jacob felt his heart beating out of control as he ran again and jumped into the darkness. Small twigs broke beneath his old shoes as he followed the footsteps as best he could. An ice-cold breeze was blowing in his face, and the whole atmosphere in here seemed off. There were no birds singing in here, nor insects buzzing around. With winter soon setting in, there should be less, but not none. He could hardly see the ground he was running on, and only caught glimpses of the tracks. But every time he saw the two next to each other, he felt this strange, stinging pain in his heart. Ruth was in danger, it told him, and he wanted to speed up even more, but suddenly stopped as a new noise reached his ear. It was the sound of a goat pawing the ground. Jacob grabbed hold of one of the massive tree trunks standing next to him as he looked around. There, off to the side, he could see movement in the half-dark. He wanted to call out to the person there, but something inside him stopped him from making any noise. The blood in his veins seemed to freeze. It was Ruth, but she was kneeling on the cold earth. Jacob snuck closer. The girl was on the ground, and in front of her, he could see something else. A goat, black as the night, with strange horns, was standing before her. The sight felt completely off. Her face was lowered as the animal moved its head from side to side. Jacob grabbed hold of the rod in his belt and wanted to pull it out, but what he saw next stayed his hand. The goat was moving backwards, rising up onto its hind legs. It would attack Ruth! Jacob hit a tree with his open hand, and a slap echoed around the woods, drawing the goat's attention. Still standing on its two hind legs, the thing turned its head toward him and looked at him. The eyes he saw weren't those of a goat. They were glowing. Jacob felt his arms and legs starting to shake. What the hell had he gotten himself into? The goat shivered as it turned its body toward him. No, it wasn't an animal, his mind warned. This thing was something completely different. Jacob looked closely at the form. It was shaking, growing. He could see the muscles under the black fur bulging, its hooves melting. Ruth was still kneeling there, staring at the ground. Had she brought this thing here? Summoned it? Mother's words came back to him. Had it been real? Jacob looked on in horror as the thing took a step toward him, the leg extending far beyond what should be possible. It was growing with every moment. The back legs got bigger and longer, and the face of the animal seemed to shift and turn like an apple rotting in the sun. The thing was already taller than him as it pulled in its second leg and reached out to one of the trees. Please do my bidding, a soft voice whispered in the darkness. Jacob couldn't take it anymore. He turned and ran and immediately heard the dark figure coming after him. It was taking wide steps, but it kept up as he ran through the woods back toward the farm. He needed to warn them, the boys and the girl. They all needed to run. Jacob broke through a thicket and heard the thing snarl. Whatever it was here to kill them all. Ruth had brought it. The rod slipped from his belt and fell to the ground, but Jacob didn't stop or pick it up. He needed to run. All his instincts howled in unison. There, the edge of the forest. His lungs were burning as he jumped out from between the trees, landed in a barren field, fell and scrambled to get up again. He could still hear it. The thing was following him, coming after him. Jacob felt tears in his eyes as his fingers dug into the dirt, and he pulled himself up. He ran straight across the field, and not even 10 seconds later he could hear the thing reaching the soft dirt of the farm as well. Where should he run to? The old stable. The girl was still in there. He wanted to howl and scream, but had no voice. He couldn't just leave her behind. Jacob looked up and could see 2 figures standing by the old building. The boys, they had come back, but they weren't looking at him. He tried to scream, but no noise came out of his throat. They needed to run. He heard the thing behind him snarling, looked over his shoulder and almost fainted from shock. It was massive. Twice as tall as him, with a lanky body that was covered in black fur. Its head was a stark white and made of bone. A giant goat skull framed by dark patches of fur. Jacob screamed in his mind and forced his head to look forward again. The boys had noticed it as well. He could see them scrambling to get inside the old stable. No, they would be trapped in there. He wanted to shout at them, but knew it would be pointless. Jacob cursed in his mind, jumped over the last groove and reached the lawn. He couldn't abandon them. A part of him screeched. With a last jump, he reached the old stable, pulled open the door and dove inside. 3 pairs of eyes were looking at him, frightened out of their minds. There wasn't much he could do, he knew. With a bang, he closed the door and propped his back against it, stretching out his arms to grab the frame. This was all he could do. Massive footsteps were coming closer and closer. He could hear the kids whimpering and saw them huddling together. The footfalls reached the lawn. He could hear it clearly. Jacob closed his eyes. He didn't want to see what was about to happen. The footsteps reached the front of the stable, and he immediately felt it as the thing put one of its misshapen hands against the door. Jacob had to strain to keep in place as it gave the entrance a light shove. He could hear it, the hooves scraping over the wood, the thing outside breathing out. Jacob's fingers burrowed into the wood of the frame as he braced himself against the packed dirt floor. The thing pushed again, and he felt the door swinging inward, almost lifting him up. Jacob threw his body back against it. The monster snarled, and its hot breath reached his skin. He felt sick and scared, but couldn't just run away. This door needed to stay shut. A hoof scraped over the outside of the wood. He knew he wouldn't be able to hold it again. The next push would either break the door or send him flying. Tears were streaming down his face, and he opened his eyes. The 3 kids were looking up at him. He tried to smile. Jacob heard the thing stepping back, then shooting forward. This was it, he thought, braced against the door and felt it a split second later. Something big and massive crashed against the entrance and pulverized the old wood. The ground beneath him disappeared as he felt himself getting flung forward. He plunged to the floor in a shower of splinters. The world was spinning. Children were screaming. A monster snarled. Jacob tried to get up again, but his body seemed far too sluggish. He could smell it, feel it, and hear it. The loud breathing. He needed to get up, he told himself. Otherwise, the thing would take them all. His arms seemed to disappear as he fell to the ground again. He tasted blood on his tongue. Everything hurt. The monster snarled, and Jacob felt its touch on his leg. He couldn't even turn to face it. Not them! A voice cut through the noise. Ruth. She had come. Leave them be! She should run away, Jacob thought, but he couldn't find the strength to even lift his head. To his surprise, the monster let go of his leg and gave off another snarl, just as the world turned black around him. He dreamed of terrible noises off in the distance, screams and shouts, wood and stone breaking. And all the while, the children were crying next to him. Jacob wasn't sure how long he had been out, as he suddenly opened his eyes and felt all the pain that had been kept at bay rushing back into him. Someone was pulling on his arm. It was the younger boy. With a silent groan, he pushed himself off the floor and felt blankets slipping off his shoulders. They had draped them over him. It was cold. He was thankful. A hand grabbed him by the shoulder again and helped him up to his feet. Something was different. Jacob felt it immediately. The boy supported him as he took a step and noticed the broken-down door of the stable. It looked like someone had taken a battering ram to it, he thought, and felt a stinging pain in his shoulder blades. A soft voice told him to take a look outside. It was the girl, the 14-year-old, who was on his other side, now holding him up as well. Jacob could smell the destruction already. There was no doubt in his mind that something terrible must have happened after he had fallen unconscious. They helped him through the open door, and as he looked up, he thought his heart would stop. In front of him was what remained of the main building. A broken, burned-out husk. The stones of the walls were everywhere. Shattered pieces of wood littered the ground. A small, dark wisp of smoke was rising toward the sky from where the hearth once stood. Jacob could see the destruction, but he couldn't quite believe it. It was as if an earthquake had hit the building. Hardly a single stone still stood on the other. A thing. It had torn that place apart. And from the rubble, Jacob could see a single old female hand sticking out. That had been its real target, he knew. His legs wobbled, and he fell to the ground. Mother and father were dead. Their home demolished. He and the children wouldn't be able to stay here anymore, right? His eyes found something on the ground, and he wanted to scream. There were footprints in the soft dirt leading away from the destroyed house. 2 pairs. One by giant, malformed hooves. The other from a little girl, walking calmly beside it.